And welcome to the Aaron Katzman Show. I'm your host, Aaron Katzman. We speak about your life, your money, and your investments. And as always, we're coming to you from the spiritual and soon-to-be financial capital of the world, Jerusalem, Israel. If you like this content, please hit the like button below. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe to both the YouTube channel and to the podcast. And I think you're going to this time. If you find this show interesting or somebody who might be interested by it, feel free to share it with said person. That helps us, and it certainly will help them get a little bit more intelligence and information on a very important issue, which we're going to speak to now. We're going to continue our series about estate planning, and it's my honor to bring on this show a past guest, and it was so good, back by popular demand, Mirit Hoffman, who's an elder law lawyer and a gerontologist. Her practice focuses on helping mainly senior citizens to stay in control when they reach significant junctions in their lives, which includes helping them with their estate planning, preparing wills, enduring power of attorney, prenups, and financial agreements for a second marriage, also trusts, advising on estate and tax issues relating to people who have dual citizenship, and most importantly, she's also a podcaster, a fellow podcaster, and she hosts the Golden Topics, Significant Crossroads for Seniors podcast. You can check her out there. Mirit, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a nice welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's dive right in, okay?
Sure.
Estate planning, okay? What do I need it for, right? So, I'll die one day, God forbid, until 120, as we say. Whatever assets I accumulate, I'll die, and it'll just get passed on to my children, right?
Well, will it? I don't
question.
know. It depends. There are three. Well, look, estate planning is really the main documents for estate planning, as I see it, are three. We have a will, which deals with what you want to do when you are no longer around, how you want to transfer your assets to your loved ones. And we'll talk about what happens if you don't have a will in a second. And there's also two other documents which are no less important, which is the enduring power of attorney and a medical directive. But let's just talk about the wills because you just brought it up. So if somebody doesn't have a will, and let's take the regular Joe Schmo. He's married, he has a couple of kids, and he doesn't have a will. And I've had cases like that. What happens is, according to the Israeli law, whatever he owns, half of his estate will get divided to his wife, and half of it will get to the three kids, let's say to the two kids in this case. So you're thinking, okay, so no big deal. What's the problem with that? Well, now it gets complicated because if we're talking, let's say, about a house that they've lived in for their whole lives, it's usually 50-50, at least in the taboo, it's registered 50-50. His 50% now will go to his 50%, 50% of that, which means 25%, will go to his wife, and 25% will get divided between the two kids. So now if the widower, let's say, wants to move house, she doesn't want this big house, she wants to go somewhere else, she wants to relocate to one of her kids, she has to ask the kids permission to sell the house as well, because they are now owning part of it as well. When she sells it, she has to give them part of that. Not everybody's happy doing that because, people live longer nowadays. They need that money. They don't want to be dependent, God forbid, on their kids. So it could get complicated. If somebody passes on when he is relatively young and he still has minor children, which are under the age of 18, if she wants to sell the house, she'll have to get the court's consent for it because the kids are minors, which makes it even more complicated. If he wanted to distribute maybe to his grandchildren or to somebody else, he won't be able to do that because he hadn't prepared a will.
The upshot is one really does need, if they want their wishes after death to be adhered to, they need to plan, right?
Absolutely. I'm all for planning. Life gives us curveballs as it is, but if you can prepare something in advance to make your life easier, make your loved ones' lives easier, I'm all for it. I think it's super important.
So a question that I get often, I got it about 4 hours ago, is with somebody who has, let's say a dual citizen, somebody who has here, dual citizen being defined as Israel and the US, and they have assets in both countries. It comes time to make this will that we're talking about. Do you think that they need, I know it's a complicated question, but do they need to have two wills, or is one will enough? Or could you talk to that subject a little bit?
Okay, so first of all, each case is, it has its own thing. So I'm just giving a general idea of what needs to be done. The short answer is it depends. Now, it's a complicated issue simply because it depends what kinds of assets you have. If, for instance, you have real estate assets in America, let's just take America as an example, then it may be wise to prepare a will separate for the US and a separate will for Israel, simply because there are different laws. The law for real estate goes according to where the real estate is located. In each state, there's different taxes concerning that real estate maybe. So it might just be more effective to do that. Also, sometimes for your assets in the States, you might want to have a trust, and that is a whole different ballgame altogether. In a lot of cases, all you have is money, right? You've invested. People make aliyah as they get older. Most of their money is invested, not necessarily in real estate, but in other things which you take care of them for them in the States. And then you can prepare one will, which will also apply to the US. But you have to also take into consideration that it is not the be all and end all, meaning you may have to still probate it in the US. There may be issues for IS tax certificate that you may need for the US. So the will is wonderful, but it doesn't solve all issues. And it's something that, you need to discuss with your lawyer, depending on a case by case thing.
When you do an Israeli will, somebody also asked me this today, in the US, you need to have an executor on the will. In Israel, is it required to have an executor on the will? Is it
I'm so
something that's
happy you asked me
recommended?
that question. I'm so happy. So no, you do not need to have an executor in your will in Israel at all.
Uh-huh.
Most wills don't need it. Most wills usually, you're bequeathing to your loved one, to your significant other, or to your children in equal shares, and therefore there's no need. One of them can act as the executor. There's no need to have an executor. Executors are usually the lawyers that want to make money out of it. Sorry, lawyers, but that's the truth. And there's no need. Also in Israel, the fact that you mention it in a will doesn't mean it gets assigned, meaning the court will decide if that will actually has to have an executor appointed, and he will appoint it accordingly. So the fact that you've mentioned it doesn't necessarily mean it will happen, and it depends on it also on a case by case. So if it's a very complicated situation, for instance, somebody has money and real estate in various places in the world, not just in Israel, and there's really a need for somebody to check everything and to locate everything, then yes, an executor is the right word to go. But if we're talking about somebody who doesn't have a very complicated estate, then there's no need for that.
That was good. That was worth this whole interview, I think. I want to get onto another topic because as I mentioned to you before we went on, I was reading your bio and something stuck out. A couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, I wrote an article. I came across an article and then I wrote an article about the financial ramifications of a trend which is sort of picking up steam globally, is that when people in their divorce in their 50s, let's just title it like that. And I was going it from a certain angle about in terms of financial planning. But then as I was reading your bio, it struck me like, wow, this is fascinating, right? What do you do in terms of planning when you're on your second marriage and you sort of deal with that? And I thought that maybe we should spend, the bulk of our time talking about that and what your sort of recommendations are. Should people join their finances? How do they keep things separate if they both are coming in with children and they want their children to inherit themselves? Like, could you speak to us about sort of the issues and some of the solutions?
Sure. So first of all, a lot of people don't want to prepare it. It's also from a psychological point of view. A lot of people don't want to deal with prenups, for instance, when they're in a second marriage, because they feel it takes away from the whole romance. I've had a lot of people say to me, listen, I'm in my 60s, for God's sakes. I was divorced or I lost my significant other 20 years ago. I finally found the guy. And now I'm going to start doing with this prenup and estate planning. It sort of makes it a little bit icky. I really don't want to deal with it. And that's a very big no-no. And it's something that really needs to be discussed, actually, because you're coming in from a very different from a very different place from when you were in your 20s, right? You have accumulated assets. You do have children of your own. You are your own person. You're coming into this relationship with a lot of stuff that you didn't have, that didn't exist when you were in your 20s. And if I ask people, okay, so what are you telling me? What is really important for you? If you're saying, I don't want to deal with it because it makes it sort of icky and it loses, all the magic of a second relationship. And they say to me, no, actually, it's really important for me to make sure that my children, I love my new husband, my new partner, my new whatever, but I really want to make sure that my children get what I've been working so hard to accumulate. So I'm thinking, okay, so if that's what you want, you really have to do some planning. And it doesn't take away from the romance. I think it's actually the opposite, because you're two adults, you're having a very adult conversation about it. And actually, the fact that you're discussing it now makes it very clear for the rest of how you want to handle your life together, without having to guess or having to feel like, uncomfortable discussing things. Just as a silly example of, are we going to have one account? Are we going to have two accounts? Are we going to put the same amount of money in this one account or not? You're making more money than I am. Am I supposed to put in the same amount of money to, handle the house budget or not? And what about the fact maybe one of us has still kids living in the house? So maybe you should put in all these like icky conversations sort of are become much clearer when you have a conversation about it with your estate planning, with your prenup, because then you're sitting down and you're just discussing and talking about it. And once everything is you've cleared the air about it, then you can go on holding hand in hand to the sun, with the sunset, being all romantic again, because it's all clear, it's put on the table, and it's very good. Like, I don't think that should be a problem. Now, if we're talking about, there's also things that you have to tachlis look about. For instance, if you've worked, you have pension accounts, kupot gemel, make sure who your beneficiaries registered on these. Is it still your ex or the one that passed away? And if yes, then please make sure to fix that. I've had horrible cases when it was a very nasty divorce and she forgot about the whole thing. And then when she passed away, lo and behold, her beneficiary was her ex-husband, because she never bothered to change that. So once you're doing, with the divorce or with the coming into a nice new relationship, hopefully in a clean slate, make sure that you clear up everything that needs to be cleared up from a financial point of view, including your beneficiaries on your kupot gemel and pension accounts, just as an example. The same thing with your will. You might need to change your will. If you have an old will, it might need to be updated. And then there's a lot of questions that come up. If I'm moving into his house, will he let me stay in the house if he passes away before me? Yes or no? Maybe he will. Is it forever? Is it for a year? Is it for 2 months? How long is it? And if those are things that are not sorted out in a will, then there's a surprise afterwards, because the kids want the kids might get along with the other parent, with the other partner very nicely, but at the end of the day, they want their inheritance because maybe they need it. Maybe they need that money. Maybe they need something that they want to do with it. So that person will have to leave the house, and it could be she'll be in her 80s at that point, or in her early 90s.
It's funny that you say that. I had a case, I know somebody, and it was a second marriage for both of them, and they didn't put everything in writing. The husband died, she was the wife, and he had kids. And we had that same issue that we mentioned before, right? In Israel, it's 50-50. And, he gave instructions that she can stay in the house, right? But it was not written down, it was like verbal. And the kids basically forced her, because she was old and feeble and not well. And the kids were very aggressive with her, and they had a great relationship with her for 30 years of the marriage. But when it came time for them to get their hands on a nice apartment in the middle of Talbia in Jerusalem that wasn't church land and was worth a pretty penny, they basically forced her out. And it was tragic. But yeah, so what you're saying is like so spot on.
That's exactly what happens. They come to me and they're shocked because we've had such a great relationship. Everybody was so hunky-dory, and now you passed away, and like 5 minutes later, the tables are turned and I have to move out. So those are important issues that should be discussed and should be planned accordingly. The same thing with the, enduring power of attorney, which is a document that you prepare for in advance for if, God forbid, something happens to you and you lost your mental capacity. When you're in a blended family, I've had lots of cases with that. Who is going to take care of you? Is it going to be your new partner? Is it going to be your children? If it's your children, then, you still need to you have to consider also the new partner, especially if we're talking about, let's just as an example, you've moved into his house, and you have put in your enduring power of attorney, the children take care of you. And now they need to, they need a caregiver, to hire a caregiver. But they have to actually also take into consideration the husband who's still living in the house. Does he agree to have a caregiver? Maybe he feels uncomfortable with the caregiver. Maybe he would rather she move out. Maybe that wasn't part of their discussion, and maybe that wasn't part of the plan from his point of view, but they never actually had the discussion. So how would she know? These are things that are really, really important that they come up. And as you get older, things happen. Although, life expectancy is much longer now, but you get all kinds of illnesses that attack you as you get older. So those are things that are not, this is not science fiction. This is actually real life, and it happens. And the relationship between a child and a new partner, doesn't matter how old the child is when his parent is either divorced or had passed away. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is completely and utterly going to get along 100% well with the other partner. And maybe as long as his mother is alive and well, yes. But if his mother isn't, that's when the friction actually comes to surface.
Totally. And I think that's sort of, I always say my responsibility when I'm meeting with clients is to paint the least rosy of scenarios. And maybe that's our jobs as financial professionals, as professionals, I should say, to take that approach even here also, that the assumption is things are not going to be hunky-dory and silky smooth. And because of that, you really, really need to plan and codify everything in writing, or else, it's going to be a disaster down the road.
Absolutely. It's interesting because a lot of times I have a client that comes and says, yeah, I've been married for 35 years. The kids are totally fine and everything is great. And then when I have the conversation together with the kids, I see the faces in the background. I'm thinking it's not totally fine, and they're not 100% okay with it. And something is going to happen, God forbid, and then it's going to be a disaster. So the idea is, you bring up all kinds of questions that nobody really wants to talk about, but you have to talk about them. And even if it means that suddenly somebody's so shocked because they thought from their point of view everything was hunky-dory, suddenly they realize it's not. It's good to talk about it now when everybody can listen and hear it and everybody's well, and not wait for a circumstance when it's a disaster, when somebody is ill, and then have to deal with it in crisis mode with all that it entails, and especially with the emotional side that takes over.
That's great. Wow. Well, I could talk about this. This is a topic in of itself, I think, and we can. I think we're going to bring you back again and speak about this, because it's a fascinating topic, and it's a topic which becomes more and more relevant. I mean, I just see it.
Absolutely.
I see it all the time. I really see it all the time. And estate planning is tricky enough, but when you're merging families and merging children, and you can just imagine if it's not done right, that it's just going to blow up. It's not going to end well, as we like to say.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks, Mirit. How can people get a hold of you?
First of all, I have an email. It's mirit@lawmirit.com. Also have a cell phone number, 0522-407-999. You can WhatsApp me. I try to be fairly accessible. If I don't answer you straight away, I will answer you within a day or two. Yeah. And you can also find me through my website, lawmirit.com.
And we'll put all that information in the notes on the show also, so people can just click through and contact you if they need to. Mirit Hoffman, thank you so much. This was great.
My pleasure as always, Aaron.
You've been tuning into the Aaron Katzman Show. We speak about your life, your money, and your investments. If you like this, please hit the like button below. If you've not yet done so, please subscribe to both the YouTube channel and to the podcast. And if you found this interesting and you know somebody else who will find this interesting, please share it with them as well. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll speak to you soon.